Welcome to Anarchic Areopagita. Today is Thursday, July 16th. My name is John Weeks. I'm joined today by Colonel Rick Francona, retired Air Force intelligence officer with vast experience in the Middle East. Welcome, Colonel.
Nice to be here.
So I actually got connected to you by the great Larry Johnson.
I know Larry quite well.
A friend of Scott Horton and the Libertarian Institute, where I work as an assistant editor, and that backs my podcast very graciously. And originally, me and Scott were trying to figure out if the Carter administration had directly signed off on Iraq's invasion of Iran in 1980. But you came in to the scene a little later in the last 2 years of that war. So that's where your real experience and work was. And then you were there when the United States was partnering, if not allied, with Iraq.
Allied's kind of a strong word. We were providing specialized intelligence support, very narrowly defined by the U.S. government on what we could do.
So you were there for that, and then after the war, you were there for operations Desert Shield.
Desert Shield, Desert Storm, correct.
Desert Storm, and you were the interpreter for General Schwarzkopf.
Correct.
That is outstanding. That's amazing.
It was an interesting time, and he was an interesting man, and he was larger than life. I mean, he was a big man anyway, but he had presence. Whenever he walked into a room, you knew he was there.
Excellent. And you've written a book. You wrote a book, Allied to Adversary, an
Correct.
eyewitness account of Iraq's fall from grace, which I've got right here.
Mm-hmm.
People can see. And it is an amazingly well-written book. Really beautiful. Really beautiful to read, really engaging, really informative, and really amazing for its ability to just zero in on the human aspect of war, and in a sense really sad and tragic, although there is a lot of humor in it too.
It was the whole experience, because as you know from the book, one of the officers that I worked with, an Iraqi officer in Baghdad, I later met him sitting across the table at the talks with the Iraqis after Desert Storm. It was really kind of odd to be in that situation.
And that was it's Safwan?
Safwan.
So my understanding was that was basically like being on the USS Missouri when the Japanese surrendered.
Not quite as dramatic, but yes, it was, and we set the stage quite well. This was a small airfield just inside Iraq, and General Schwarzkopf wanted to make sure it was inside Iraq. We wanted to let them know that we're on your territory that we now own for temporary, and he had the place ringed with tanks and armored personnel carriers, helicopters in the air. So it was meant to intimidate. And you could tell the Iraqi generals were intimidated.
No doubt. Can you take us back to when you first went to Baghdad to provide the specialized intelligence?
Yeah, it was late 1987. The war was not going well for the Iraqis. The Iranians had earlier taken the Fal Peninsula, and that's a pretty good sized chunk of southern Iraq. It sits between Kuwait and Iran. And we had done an assessment at the Defense Intelligence Agency. Analysts much smarter than I am figured this out. But they said if the Iranians launch, as they did every year, their spring offensive, they'll be able to break the Iraqi line. And once you break that Iraqi line south of Basra, it's pretty much a straight drive to Baghdad. So we were concerned that if the Iranians were successful in launching a spring offensive, then the Iraqis would probably lose the war. So, and these were pretty high-level discussions going on inside the U.S. government because we were very reticent about helping the Iraqis. They did not have a sterling reputation. You know, Saddam Hussein was a thug, and nobody really wanted to be in bed with him. But the choices were: we don't do anything and allow Iran to win, or we take some actions to prop the Iraqis up. So at least shoot for a stalemate. That would have been the best of everybody's world, was a stalemate, which is not too far from what happened. So the decision was made: we're going to have to help these guys, and that fell on my boss, his office, and me. And they weren't real. He was pretty high profile senior officer, civilian in the Defense Intelligence Agency, and his travel may have been noticed, and we weren't sure we wanted to send anybody to Baghdad unless we had this all wired. So you find an Air Force captain who doesn't know any better, and you send him to Baghdad.
And you had told me previously when we first connected that there had been, if I recollect correctly, the Iraqis were working with the CIA, and then that relationship didn't work out. So that's where defense stepped in.
It was supposed to be about terrorism, and we were under the impression, we, the U.S. government writ large, the Iraqis had better insights as to Middle Eastern terrorism than we did. We were kind of hoping to pick their brains on that. We also had hostages in Lebanon early on, and we were trying to do anything to see if we could get them back, hoping the Iraqis might help us with that. It never really went anywhere, and I don't want to throw stones at the CIA, but they weren't willing to give. They're very, very protective of their information. So the Iraqis didn't feel they were getting anything out of the deal. So it really just kind of atrophied on the vine. But by 1987, it was obvious to everyone that the Iraqis were in really bad shape. They were going to lose the war. And the assessment was written, sent it over to the White House. And this is Reagan. He used to scribble in the margins all the time. And he said, no, Iran cannot win this war. And then in the bottom it said, Frank, do something. Frank Carlucci, Secretary of Defense. And the next thing I know, we get called to Carlucci's office, my boss and I. He said, okay, what's it going to take? And my boss said, well, we can pass them enough intelligence to blunt the Iranian offensive, but we don't want to pass enough that they're going to win the war. And Carlucci laughed. He said, can you do that fine? He said, we can try. And he said, okay, I run this up the flagpole. And it took about 2 months to get it all approved because this had to go to State Department, CIA, DOD. Everybody had to agree, and it worked.
So you were calibrating the intelligence. And,
yeah.
And you did a good job.
We're trying to decide what we could give. And they put restrictions on what we could do. We couldn't give them satellite imagery. We could show them satellite imagery. We could provide them drawings based on the satellite imagery. We didn't want to give them the actual imagery. A little humorous story. We were staying at the Rashid Hotel in Baghdad when we had our initial trip, and I had carried, I think about 6 rolls of satellite imagery annotated with where everything was and what we thought would be useful for the Iraqis to airstrike, to blunt this coming Iranian offensive. And I noticed, and we were staying in a hotel room with the defense attaché, officer named Dave Lemon, excellent officer. I'm sorry he's not with us anymore. And my boss, Pat, and we were sitting in the table, and one of the Iraqi officers came in and said, did we need anything? And he walked over, he moved the map a little bit to the right because I think they had a camera in the ceiling. So. And we just assumed the rooms were wired. I mean, the Rashid was built for some big Pan Arab conference that never happened. And so I know all the rooms were wired.
Sneaky, sneaky. So that's one of the really most fascinating parts of your book, is that you're working with your counterparts in
Yeah, Muslim. Yeah.
the Directorate of Military Intelligence,
Yeah.
and you're getting to know them. You're thinking of them not just as colleagues, but kind of as friends. How good were they
Um,
at
yeah,
listening to
when
what you were trying?
that's a really, really good question, John. When the war started, they were awful. Their intelligence was just non-existent because remember, in most of these regimes in the Middle East, the function of the intelligence services is not to provide foreign intelligence; it's to protect the regime, and that's all their focus was at threats to Saddam. So then they're in a war, and now they have to figure out, okay, we're going to need information on the Iranians. So they developed an aerial reconnaissance capability. They had a fairly good signals intelligence capability, and I never knew much about their human capability. I assumed that they were doing that as well. Plus, they had interrogations, that sort of thing. But they got better, but they weren't us because we had all the technology, and so you could tell they were really thirsty for what we could do. But over the years, they got better. I remember, and we took advantage of us being there. I would go and stay. I would always stay longer than I needed to because I said, "Oh, no, let me go see something." So what I would do is I would get there and usually the next day I would have my meeting with Muslim, my counterpart. And normally one of the deputy directors of military intelligence, Wafiq Samurai, comes to mind. He later defected. But Wafiq would be there and we would explain, what we were doing. But I said, well, show me something while I'm here. I said, and I remember I think my second trip or so, they had retaken the Foul Peninsula based on the information that we had given them. And I said, take me down to the Foul Peninsula. Show me, let me walk the battlefield. And so they put me in a helicopter, flew me down to the battlefield. I was down there for, probably 2 days and walking, and it was fascinating. One thing, I talk about this in the book, is I found a lot of used atropine injectors. Atropine injectors are only used for one thing: nerve gas. So I was fully convinced that that the Iraqis had used nerve gas on that battlefield.
Whoa.
They had not gotten a chance to clean it all up when I was there. So I stole one.
You requisitioned lab. That's good intelligence gathering, Colonel. Yeah. So the Iraq-Iran war, it's something that I've heard about my whole life. I have the basic understanding that it lasted for 8 years, but you go into a lot of detail about the battles, the geography. Can you just explain for the audience, like, what it was like what it would have been like to be in that war? It kind of seemed to me, you're just, especially the Iranians, they would take all these volunteers and just throw them at the Iraqi line. It made me think, what's kind of like the World War I
That's
movies.
True. They would do these human wave attacks. A lot of them weren't even armed. They were to pick up a rifle of somebody that fell beside them. So it was a bloodbath on both sides. I mean, the casualties were horrendous. If you extrapolate the population, it would be like going to war in the United States losing 16 million casualties. Whoa. I mean, those are unheard of numbers. I don't think we could survive, but they did. I like to make the comparison to the Soviet Union in World War II, the casualties that they took. They're on that level. And the Iraqis paid a big price. But remember, it was the Iraqis who invaded. It was an Iraqi invasion of Iran because Saddam thought they were weakened enough because of the Iranian Revolution. He says, I want to take care of this so that there's no Iranian Revolution here, because Iraq is a majority Shia country, and the Iranian Revolution is almost all Shia. So Saddam was concerned. And so he thought, I can take these guys. A big mistake, miscalculation. I mean, the numbers they don't pencil out. There was no way the Iraqis were going to actually go in and remove that government. It wasn't going to happen.
You say in the book
I'm
Well,
sorry.
just you say in the book that after the revolution, the Ayatollah was calling for the overthrow of the Ba'athist regime
Yeah,
and had
no,
sanctioned.
they were bitter enemies, and so that, you know, they wanted to expand. They wanted to export the revolution to and see the Iranians regard themselves as the guardians of all things Shia. No matter where you are, if you're a Shia, the Iranians believe they have the obligation to protect you and also bring you into the fold. So you look at countries, the eastern province of Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, Shia majority, of course, Iraq, Lebanon, portions of Lebanon. So you know that's where you see the Iran and the Houthis. So you see the Iranians got to have their fingers in all of this. It's they're all based on the religion. So and one of Saddam's calculations is one of his miscalculations was one of the first things that the Ayatollah did when Khomeini, when he took power, was to pretty much wipe out all of his senior officer corps, because he says these guys were they were part of the Shah's military, so I don't want them. So if you were a colonel or above, you were probably in danger of being either dismissed or killed. So there was a purge. So when the Iraqis invaded, the senior officer corps really didn't exist, and that was part of Saddam's calculation. But the Iranians, you know, look at, I mean, you know, look at what's going on today. I think many people are surprised at how resilient the Iranians have been. I mean, given what we've done to them, they're still able to launch ballistic missiles every day.
Did that surprise you?
Yes, yes. I knew I'd studied this for a long time. I spent most of my career, you know, the Iraqis, Iranians, Lebanon, but the fortifications that they constructed, we knew that they had these caves all up and down the Persian Gulf coast. I just don't think we realized, or I didn't realize, the extent and how pervasive they are and how effective they are. So, they have a missile on a launcher. They roll it out, fire the missile, pull them out back. Even if we were there, we couldn't do anything about it.
How different is that from what you were seeing from the Iranians when you were advising your counterparts in Iraq in 1987, 1988?
When I toured the fortifications on the Fao Peninsula, because the Iranians had that for a while, and they had fortified it with a lot of these fortifications. And so I was getting to get a glimpse of the Iranians are excellent engineers, as are the Iraqis, but the Iranians are in a different class. And a lot of the military engineering, they learned from us. When the Shah was in power, a lot of his engineers were trained at Fort Belvoir. So it made sense that they would have that. So, yeah, I've been fairly, and I don't want to use the word impressed. I don't want to, give the Iranians anything, but you have to respect what they've done. That's always the danger you fall into, is, well, we're the Americans. It's going to be easy. It's not going to be easy.
That's another thing that I really loved about your book, is that I get so much throughout my life. I get so much information about foreign policy and war from individuals that are not directly involved in it, from reporters, from journalists, from professors. But to realize that when you go to war, you have actual men and women from your nation risking their lives, getting killed, having to work with different governments that are going to be spying on them, that could turn on them. It's really very impressive, the coalitional abilities and teamwork. And when I talk to retired military or intelligence personnel, like, they always have this, or they tend to always have this perspective where they really recognize the humanity of the enemy. They don't go in for the cheering on the bloodlust. They feel like, well, if we're at war, we should win the war. Whereas so many people in the American discourse who are not in the military or who were never in the military, it's easy for them to say, let's just blow them off the face of the map. When it's like, well, do you know what that's nice. You're sitting in your office in DC and there's a map on your wall and you're saying, oh, let's blow off the map. But like actual, Colonel Francona is actually going to have to go and do assessments, and some guy's going to have to bring in the satellite imagery, and we got to like figure out which weapons platforms we got to bring in, and we got to send our young men and women to actually do this. And it's not an easy thing. And that really comes through in your book beautifully.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, it was. I learned a lot in that job working with the Iraqis, because you could see what their strengths and what their weaknesses were. And since I spent a lot of time with some of the senior Iraqis, particularly the intel officers, and then when I would go out into the field with them, I would talk to some of their other officers, and I got a feel for who they were and how they thought. And I was able to meet a lot of the senior officers, and this came very handy when I was with General Schwarzkopf, because he would call me in and he'd say, "What do you know about the Iraqi 7th Corps?" I said, "Well, it's commanded by a General Dagestani." He said, "Do you know him?" I said, "I met him. I don't say I know him, but," he said, "Well, tell me about him." I said, "Well, he's not an Arab. He's a Circassian. So Saddam trusts him because he's not going to overthrow Saddam. He's not an Arab." And, so there's little insights there. And I said, and there was another general, commander 3rd Corps, and these guys were actually pretty good. And I told him that. I said, "Sir, you're going to have to watch these two." I said, they actually know what they're doing. Some of the others, it's basically a conscript army. Even even the junior officers, they was all conscript. So when you find a good general, they had some.
How much of Desert Storm was driven by what you had learned about the Iraqis and what they had learned about us from that partnership?
I don't think they got I think what they got out of it was a really good appreciation for the level of our intelligence. And we weren't really given anything really super sensitive, but I think they could tell, if we have this, what else do they have that they're not showing us? And I remember having a conversation with my counterpart, and he said, "So you guys used to work with the Iranians?" I said, "Well, not me, but yes." He said, "So is there a Rick Francona in Baghdad, in Tehran right now?" I said, "No, we're not playing both sides." Although we've been accused of that, we weren't, and it was. But it gave you a unique feel. Plus, not too many people, not too many Americans, except for like embassy staff, got to see much of Iraq. And it was a closed society. So just getting a feel for it. I don't know. I used to work for an old master sergeant, and he told me, he says, "Rick," he said, "there's just nothing like being there. You got to smell it. You got to look at it. You got to hear it." And so I got an appreciation of how Baghdad functioned. And of course, when I was there, we had the War of the Cities, where the Iranians were firing Scuds into Baghdad, and the Iraqis had developed the El Hussein missile by taking the Scud and shaving down the warhead and adding an extra fuel tank and then launching it to get extra range. So they were bombarding each other's capitals. So in the middle of the night, there was no warning. You just hear an explosion, and you wake up. Okay, back to sleep. But that's how the Iraqis lived.
I learned this in your book, that the name Baghdad has the meaning of like swagger.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
Actually, if you look it up in a dictionary, it says Baghdad. It's based on the word to swagger like a Baghdadi. They even had a reputation before the word.
So Saddam Hussein He miscalculates. He invades Iran. Then that war ends. A couple of years later, he miscalculates again. And he, not in the tactical or lower level strategic, as it's because he does conquer Kuwait, but in the sense that this is displeasing to the West. Why did he do it?
Well, he was upset at the Arabs because during the Iran-Iraq War, all of these countries, particularly Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, funded the Iraqi war machine and opened up their ports. All this stuff came through Saudi Arabia and through Kuwait into Iraq. Some of it came through Turkey, but most of it came through Saudi Arabia. And at the end of the war, Saddam had all this debt that he owed to these rulers. And he came up with the theory that he says, listen, we paid in blood. You paid in money. He said, I think we just call this even. And they wouldn't do it. It was particularly the Kuwaitis. The Kuwaitis really wanted their money back. And we're not talking a lot of money, 10, 15, not a lot of money. The Kuwaitis could have just written it off, not even missed it. But they wanted to play hardball. And then Saddam accused them of slant drilling under the border to go after the Iraqi oil, like they didn't have enough. And there's some truth to that. The Kuwaitis were stealing some Iraqi oil. So Saddam, and there's a lot of speculation of what actually went on in that meeting with our ambassador, April Glaspie. She had a meeting with Saddam just before the invasion. And when you read his account of it, he says, I was given the green light by the United States. And I know April Glaspie. I've known her for a long time. She didn't give anybody the green light. That's not her function. That's not something she would do. But whatever reason, Saddam came out of that thinking that he was going to be able to take Kuwait, and the West wasn't going to do anything about it. And I think he was shocked when President Bush decided, no, this will not stand. And so, and of course, if you saw how the Iraqis treated the Kuwaitis, I mean, they were very, very harsh. They kind of stripped all the Kuwaiti identity, issued new license plate, the Iraqi license plate. They call it the 19th province. And they were just going to absorb it into Iraq because they believe when the British, I don't get on my soapbox here, but when the British drew lines on maps at the end of World War I, they said these 3 Ottoman provinces were going to make up the country of Iraq, the kingdom of Iraq. And he said, except we're going to cut out this one little area called Kuwait because it's got a great harbor and we want it. So they kept that as a sovereign British area for years, and until Kuwait gained its independence from Britain. And the Iraqis said, no, that was part of the Basra province, and we want it. So they took it, and they actually did it. Their military operation was very, very well done. I'll give you just a quick overview. I mean, we templated how the Iraqis worked. They did the same thing every time. So it was kind of like clockwork. They would move regular forces to the front line, and then they would have the Republican Guard pass through the lines and actually take the objective. And then they would fall back, and the regulars would come in and consolidate the game. We didn't see that in Kuwait. What we saw was the Republican Guard pass through the lines, take Kuwait, and keep on going to the Saudi border. And this is when alarm bells started to go off in Washington. And that's when President Bush sent General Schwarzkopf to see the king, the Saudi king, and offer our protection. And to his credit, the King Fahd asked for U.S. assistance. That was a major, major step to invite basically what is an infidel army into the land of the 2 holiest sites in Islam.
Well, you're facing the potential of an upset Saddam Hussein.
Yeah,
well, I guess that infidel army was looking pretty good to him.
We were I was surprised. So I was still at the Pentagon right after the invasion. I didn't go over for a couple of weeks, and so I was asked by, I forget, I think it's called the it's a gaming center in the Pentagon, and they basically do different scenarios, computer driven. And they said, we want you to be Saddam Hussein. I said, okay, because you probably know more about him than any of us. I said, okay. And here's the order of battle. This is what you have. See if you can get to Riyadh. And I thought I could do it. And but every time I got on those Saudi roads, the A-10s and the Apaches and the C-130s, it just stopped me cold. So we had withdrawn kind of from the notion that the Iraqis were going to be able to take Riyadh, and that gave everybody a lot better sleep, because when we first got there, we were really concerned. What if the Iraqis come tonight? Can we stop them? So, and that's why the big push was to get the air power in there fast.
I know guys that were in the Army during Desert Storm, and they always refer, when they talk about it, they always refer to it as Saudi, because that's where they were originally stationed. And they said that they were afraid that Iraq was going to roll over the border and crush them before they could.
I have a little aside, birthright citizenship. I wrote an article about this recently. It's on my blog, but a Saudi general came to me. He said, I was a major at the time. He says, Major, can I talk to you private? I said, okay. So I went to see him. He says, I'm an air defense officer. I went to school, air defense school, at Fort Bliss, Texas, which is where I went to Vietnamese language school, years ago. And he said, my daughter was born at the Beaumont Army Hospital on Fort Bliss. Is she an American citizen? I said, I don't know. I would say yes, but I have a friend at the embassy. Let me call her. So I called, and she asked me a question I hadn't thought of. She goes, is he on diplomatic status? I said, I don't know. I'll find out. I said, were you a diplomat? He goes, no. I said, well then, so I told her, no, he was not. She said, well, then they were subject to the jurisdiction of the United States, which is exactly what it says in the 14th Amendment. So yes, she is a U.S. citizen. I said, can I get her a passport? I said, yes. And so I did. And so I was very pleased to present this Saudi general. But what drove his question was fear. He was afraid for his family, because if the Iraqis came, he was looking for a way out, and he just found it.
Beautiful. If you had been advising Saddam Hussein before he invades, but he's thinking about doing it, he's mad, the Kuwaitis are demanding their money. I read one story where the Kuwaitis were taunting him. They were like, you can send us your war widows. He's mad. What would you advise?
Well, I would have probably advised him not to do it, but because hindsight's a wonderful thing. But if I was sitting in Baghdad in August of 1990, July of 1990, and Saddam is thinking about invading Kuwait, my advice would be, yes, militarily, this is a no-brainer. Well, and they did. They rolled right over Kuwait like 5 hours. They were in charge 5 hours later, and then they just mopped up the rest of the country. But I would have probably had him make some better inroads with the rest of the world, because I don't think he thought he was going to get away with it. He thought that maybe April Glaspie, he thought maybe she had given the green light. I said, I don't think the United States would give you a green light, but I'm not an Iraqi, so I don't know how I would have advised him. Yeah.
After the war, after Desert Storm, there's a report prepared for Congress about the war, and you participate in writing that report, and you represent the intelligence community.
Right. I wrote the intelligence annex, and I also wrote the first couple of chapters on the lead up of the war, because I lived through that. So I kind of an eyewitness, like the book says, of how we got from the end of the Iran-Iraq War, how we actually got to the invasion of Kuwait. And there was a lot of Iraqi weapons development. We thought they would demobilize. They didn't. They started pouring what little money they had left into developing ballistic missiles, a long range. I remember the super gun that they were trying to build. Gerald Bull was working on a super gun for them. They thought they could launch projectiles into Israel. So they were continuing on this militaristic path. So by the time it came time when the decision was made to invade Kuwait, they had a pretty good army. I mean, it wasn't us, but for the region, they were good.
Part of your book is talking about the work of intelligence officers and pushing back against sort of the intelligence community being blamed by other aspects of the military or the government. And I've noticed this since I was a kid. That's like I was born in 1979, so grew up during the 80s watching all these action movies, and there would be like this consistent trope where the soldiers, the special forces dudes would like go into battle, and when it go bad, they'd be like, "Oh, the intelligence guy screwed us," or like the intelligence was bad. Yeah. And I actually, and there's a lot of movies that portray, like Hollywood movies that portray the CIA as like pure evil. And I asked Matthew Ho about that once, because like Hollywood tends to portray like the military like pretty positively. And he's like, well, the Pentagon is bigger than the CIA. And they just have more entertainment liaisons, and it's a part of the culture. But like, as like a former intelligence officer, does that bother you when you see like a movie where the theme is like the CIA trained him to kill, but now they're trying to kill him?
Yeah. Yeah. When you watch a movie, there's this, when I was writing, I stumbled onto this how to write a book thing. And it says, if you're going to write fiction or you're going to make a movie, I said, there's this concept called the suspension of disbelief. So a lot of times I'm going to watch a movie and my wife yells at me. She says, quit yelling at the television. And I said, what? She goes, no. What did you always say? Suspension of disbelief. It's a movie. Just watch it. And so I do get upset when portrayed, and especially a lot of people take shots at the CIA. I spent several years over there, and I thought they do marvelous work under very, very dangerous conditions. And and I participated in some of those operations, and you learn a lot of respect for these guys, because I had an ID card to stand behind, the Geneva Convention and all that. They don't. I mean, they get caught, they die.
There's just so many crazy stories about like CIA officers getting ambushed by suicide bombers or being kidnapped in the Middle East. And so that's something that I feel like really doesn't come through even in like the propaganda, but it does in your book, that like, no, these are real people. Yeah. They're really risking their lives. They're really trying to get the best intelligence to bring the best tactics to bear.
John, you mentioned intelligence failure, and we ran into that. Let's see, when we were writing the report, it took us a year to write that report, and we wrote it in 3 versions. We wrote a top secret code word, all fancy compartments, and then we wrote a secret to release to our allies, and then we had an unclassified that the public could read. So, and to compile all of this stuff, I went around and interviewed a lot of the commanders, like General McCaffrey. I went down to Hunter Airfield where he was in Savannah, whatever that before. And I asked him, I said, sir, how did you find the intelligence? He goes, well, it depends on what level. He said, I think I got good overview, but I don't think my guys on the tactical level got what they needed. I said, yeah, that's because we're spread so thin. You can only do so much. And he was pretty understanding about it. But when I talked to a Marine general, I don't want to tell you his name, and he was quite nasty. And he said, but you weren't sending what I needed. I said, well, were you asking what you needed? He said, well, I don't know. I said, during Desert Storm, we ran the intelligence on a pull system. We had all the information there, and we expected the intelligence officers assigned to his staff to pull the information that he needed. And he said, I need to know. And Schwarzkopf used to beat us up all the time because we didn't know if he could ride tanks on where the left hook went. He said, find somebody that knows whether I can run tanks out there or not. And some Army colonel came up to him and said, sir, the Army Corps of Engineers has a unit that does just that. They helicopter in and they take soil samples and they figure the weight and all that. And he goes, no one's crossing the border. I said, then he turned to General Leidy, who was the director of intelligence. He said, Jack, find out. I said, oh, so we're going through books of 1936 oil company surveys. And it just, it wasn't going to work. So one day, and I used to get all the Saudi intel reports because they didn't know how to interrogate. So I wrote up an interrogation form in Arabic. I said, this is a form. Just fill it out for every prisoner you find. And they were going around snatching guys. And so they would fill it out and they would send it there. They would fax it to me. God, Arabic's hard enough to read, but when it's faxed, of course, all the dots kind of go away. And so I'm reading this, and it was from some Saudi unit up on the Kuwaiti border. And he said, hey, a group of 40 Bedouins just showed up from Iraq. I said, where? And he said, over to the west. I said, okay, we don't want to tell anybody, because I knew where the invasion was going. And I said, well, I need to go talk to these guys. So I told General Schwarzkopf what I wanted to do. I said, I'm going to go up and talk to these guys because they just came through there. They have trucks. They have cars. They'll know. So I went up there and I interviewed the sheikh. And of course, he was hard to understand, but I had a map and I kept laying the map down and I'd say north and he would turn the map. I said, okay, let's do it another way. Mecca. He goes, oh, okay, Mecca. And so then we figured out where they were and where they were. And I said, and his son was the best guy for all the information because I said, well, can I drive vehicles over here like bulldozers? I didn't want to say tanks. And he said, well, I drive there all the time. I said, what do you drive? He says, I have a Chevrolet Caprice. I said, why? He said, the best air conditioners. I said, really? He said, okay. And I said, so why do you drive a Caprice all over the border area? He said, I'm a courier. I said, courier. What do you courier? And he said, small packages of great value that people in Saudi Arabia want. Booze. Liquor. So I said, no, we're speaking Arabic. I said, we would call that a smuggler. And he said, that's an ugly word. I said, okay, you're Muhammad. You could be a courier. And so he gave us the best information. And I actually got him so he could read a map. I mean, he's figuring it out. He said, this is wrong. He said, this is dry except when it rains. This is wet all the time. And he was explaining the difference of the terrain. And I said, oh, can you mark them? And he goes, yeah. So you made all the marks on there. Schwarzkopf was thrilled. Anyway, so the bad thing was when I was done, he said, so when are you guys coming? I said, what? He goes, well, obviously you're going to invade here. Otherwise you wouldn't be asking me all these questions. I said, oh. I said, okay. So I went back and I told General Leidy, I said, sir, we got to do something. I think I may have maybe slipped a clue. And I said, we can't let them go back. He says, okay, let's put them up somewhere and find a nice camp for them, all that. So we basically interred them for the entire operation. So when it was all over, we were getting ready to leave. We're packing up, and I said, oh God, those Bedouin. So I went over to Saudi. I said, what about those Bedouin that we put in? And it was a nice area. We took care of them. And he said, well, I don't know. What do you want us to do with them? I said, I don't know. Let me go ask General Lighty. I said, General Lighty, those Bedouin that you've kind of interred for the war, he says, I said, yes, sir. Your signature. He said, I don't know. What could we do? I said, I have no idea. So I went to I had worked with a colonel who was, this guy knew more about the Middle East than I'll ever know. And I said, what can we do for them to make up this inconvenience? He said, they weren't living harshly. They were just not allowed to go anywhere. And he says, buy them a water truck. That way they can sell water. I said, oh, okay. And I thought, where am I going to buy a water truck? And he said, I don't know. Go ask the Army. They've got tons of them. So I went down and requisitioned a water truck. Because we're leaving. There's a lot of stuff they were going to leave anyway. So we're bad at that. We are really bad at that. Yeah. Anyway, aside. Yeah.
In terms of just back to the intelligence community, I always find it fascinating that like there's so many different. There's a CIA, but then there's a DIA, and there's NSA, and like that's part of the Army. But then the CIA has like its own little army.
Yeah, it's the Special Activities Division. Yeah.
How did you find like all those different parts coordinating during Desert Storm?
Actually, we do that very well. We used to have a DC, so the Director of Central Intelligence was also dual hat as a director of CIA. And they were the clearinghouse for everything. So whenever you're going to run an operation, you had to go through the liaison and all that. And for the most part, it did work. The biggest problem was not the intelligence community. The intelligence community generally got along, and I think they still do, because everybody had their own specialty. Defense intelligence, we were worried about foreign military and foreign military equipment. National Security Agency was all electronic stuff. Signals intelligence, communications, and radars and all that. CIA, a big UMINT network, and general intelligence across the board, where DI would specialize in that. And then you had little intelligence shops around that were technically part of the intelligence community, but they were in organizations that were not intelligence agencies. There's only 5 pure intelligence agencies. So it worked pretty well. The problem was not the intelligence community. The problem was working with law enforcement, because there's overlap there, especially when you're doing things in the United States. You have to involve the FBI. The intelligence community, we want to produce usable information, actionable intelligence. The law enforcement community, they want to build cases and prosecutions. So if we would come across an interesting piece of intelligence and the FBI got a hold of it, they would just stamp it as evidence, and you couldn't use it because chain of evidence and all that. So it was a real problem, and this came to a head during 9/11 because a lot of the information did not get shared, and they called it the wall: law enforcement on one side, intelligence community on the other, and it was just awful. I am told that it is better, but I don't know that to be true.
Okay, so now it's decades out from Desert Storm, and we've got this new war or whatever it is that's going on right now with Iran. What is your take on that based on your experience and career?
Well, this has been coming to a head for 47 years. I agree with the administration that something needed to be done. I don't know the urgency. I know that I thought the raid with the B-2s last in 25 was effective. And I thought that they had encased most of the things, but the Iraqis themselves said that they had 460 kilograms of 60% enriched uranium, and the jump from 60 to 90 is weeks. So that was the urgency of it, and that's what drove the timing. But if you look at what's going on in the Middle East, virtually every problem ends up in Tehran. It's all tied to the Iranians. They have their hands in everything, and so if you wanted to solve a lot of the problems in the Middle East, the first step would be to take out the Iranians, and I think that's what we should be doing. I'm not sure I agree with the president in all aspects when he says, "Oh, we're not here for a regime change." We need to be here for regime change. That's the only way this ends well. Because if we just kick the can down the road, we're going to be having the same conversation 10 years from now. So that's Rick Francona's take. I keep telling my wife, I said, the White House didn't call and ask me. So they never do. So I have my own opinions on what should happen. But I think writ large, we're doing the right thing. But and I have to say, my analysis of Iranian internal politics and the inner workings of the Iranian government are not good. I spent a lot of time studying it, but I don't speak Persian. I speak Arabic, so it's different. So, and they have a different mindset. I think the Iranians are an intelligent people. I really do. But I have been saying for 30 years that in the next 5 years, the government's going to collapse. So I've been wrong for 30 years. I'm amazed that they've survived this long. But then I remember Saddam when I was in Iraq. I would look around and I say, there is no way there's going to be an internal removal of this government. It's going to have to come from the outside. And so when we started operations in Iran, I said, maybe this is the catalyst that will remove this government. I still hope so, but I know I'm in the minority.
So to go back to Reagan writing no, 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 and then saying, like, do something about this. Yeah. And then they say, well, what would it take if the White House called you and said, hey, what would it take to remove this regime?
Well, I think we started doing some of it today. I don't know if you're watching the news today, but we took down three major bridges in Iran and a couple of power plants. So this is, like the president said, we're going to have bridge and power plant day. And I think that we're going to start upping the attacks on infrastructure. And of course, this is going to cause a backlash from the Iranians, because if we're going to strike their infrastructure, they're going to try and hit not just U.S. military bases in these other countries, but probably some of the economic infrastructure in places like Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, Qatar.
If the White House said, Colonel, we anticipate that there could be, as you just pointed out, economic targets hit by the Iranians, there could be an impact on the global economy. There could be a sort of economic attrition aspect to this conflict.
Actually, I think it would be localized to the region. The economic problem would be if it stops the flow of oil out of the Persian Gulf. That's a big problem, not so much for us, but for the rest of the world. And we don't live in a vacuum, so we have to take all of this into consideration. But I don't see any other way to end this. We're in this, and I don't really see a viable way to just quit. I know there's been the war powers discussions and everything. Is well, let's just end it. That doesn't solve the problem.
I talk to people who say, "Oh, the administration is playing chess. This is really about China. It's really about Russia. But you're saying it's really about Iran.
I think so. I know there's those aspects of it, but I'm looking, of course, Middle East, and I'm looking at the region, and virtually every ill that is going on there can be traced back to Tehran. If we could get a not friendly, but a non-theocratic regime in there. The Iranians are smart people. They want to be part of the world economy. It's just that they're being ruled by this small group, the IRGC. If we could get rid of them, then I think Iran would be a welcome neighbor in that part of the world. They used to be.
Would you say that walking away, ending it and walking away, as some have advised, would be similar to not removing Saddam after Desert Storm? And that's just gonna be an issue?
Okay. There was a conscious decision not to remove Saddam because we did not want to have to be an occupying power. General Schwarzkopf and General Powell and the president said, we're going to liberate. We're going to defend Saudi Arabia, Desert Shield. Then we're going to liberate Kuwait, Desert Storm, and then we're going to leave. That's the end game here. And the Iraqis are on their own. And then when there were these little rebellions in Iraq, I think we knew they were not going to be successful. And getting involved in that would have just created another forever war.
But now, with the IRGC, your advice to the White House would be you need to remove them.
Yeah,
don't stop
and I know the president has smart advisors. I know many of them. And I know that they're giving him the same advice I would be giving him. I'm just not sure he's listening because he's the president. He's the final decision, and he's got his own reasons. And I'm not privy to everything he knows. I'm sure there's a lot of intelligence out there that's informing his decisions.
Excellent. Well, Colonel, anything you'd like to promote or emphasize before I let you go?
No, I spend a good part of my day flipping through the Arabic language media, and I find that I get a much different perspective of what I get in the English language media because the English language media is covering the whole world. These Middle Eastern networks, they're covering the Middle East. So it's very, very focused, a lot of information. And, a lot of people don't like Al Jazeera, but I will tell you something. Al Jazeera is well sourced. They're well funded. So they have bureaus everywhere. You just take it with a grain of salt. It's going to be a little biased, but there's excellent reporting going on in the Arab media.
When you say you speak Arabic and you're talking about the Middle East, is it like everyone in certain countries basically speaks the same language, or is it different in like Saudi Arabia versus Jordan?
Very, very. And I don't subscribe to the linguists will tell you there are 14 distinct dialects of Arabic. I say there's maybe 5. When I went to language school, for whatever reason, the Air Force only taught their linguists Egyptian because Egypt was the bigger of the countries. They had they were the cultural center. That's where all the movies, books, and everything were being produced. And they thought we will learn Egyptian. And so you learn basic your standard Arabic for the first 9-10 months, and then you take several months of the dialect that your service has chosen you for. Then I never was stationed in Egypt. I've been there, but I've never actually worked there. I ended up in Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, Saudi, Kuwait, and so there's a Gulfi dialect, and then there's a Levantine dialect. Levantine would be Lebanon, Syria, parts of Jordan, parts of Palestine. But I find that when I speak Arabic, whoever I'm talking to will adjust their language to what I'm using. I asked, we were on vacation, and I heard a couple of people speaking Arabic, and I started talking to them. And the woman looked at me, she goes, "You sound Lebanese." I said, "Really?" She said, "But you're using Syrian words." I said, "Oh." I said, "Your accent is Lebanese, but you're using Syrian words." I said, "Oh, I'm sorry." But it's a difficult language. Was
it more difficult than Vietnamese?
It takes, learning Arabic is a lifetime challenge. You can learn Farsi on the weekends, because Farsi is an Indo-European language.
Was it harder to learn Arabic than Vietnamese?
Vietnamese is actually a simple language. Yeah. You have 6 tones in Vietnamese, but that's just a minor thing. There's no grammar. There's no plurals. There's no tenses. It's just words. There's a word that means past tense. I past tense to go. It means I went. So it's very simple. Arabic is like nothing I've ever seen before. I mean, just small example. You can't use the Arabic dictionary until you understand the morphology of the Arabic verb, because the words are not alphabetical. Because you have to figure out, an Arabic word might have 8 letters, and they don't write the vowels. So, you have to figure out, how's this thing voweled, and then you have to pick out the 3 letters that are the root, and then you look the root up, which are listed alphabetically, and then you have to know which of the 10 forms it is. And it's so hard to explain just how difficult it is. So, and then one day it clicks. It honestly took me years after I graduated from language school to actually feel comfortable with it.
Outstanding.
And now, I with the internet and YouTube, and I can watch virtually any Arabic TV station. They're all on the internet. So keep your language up.
Keep it sharp.
Try.
Colonel, thank you so much for coming on my show, sharing your
pleasure.
experiences, giving your perspective on what's going on. Really, really appreciated it.
Thanks.
Thank you so much.